Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Ernie Olima, and in today's video we're going over topic 5 of AQA A-Level French, which is Life for the Marginalised, or Quelle vie pour les marginalisés. This video is to assist your revision and is not a substitute for lessons and official textbooks. In the description of this video I'll also put a link to a good website for examples and more information on A-Level French. Let's get into it. This is now the introduction and warm-up. So the three subtopics underneath topic 5 are Qui sont les marginalisés? Quelle aide pour les marginalisés? And quelles attitudes envers les marginalisés? So the task is to try and define any key terms, so les marginalisés, and also to try and answer these questions on your own in French. So give the video a pause and practice speaking out loud. We'll go over some definitions in future slides. On this slide, I have some key terms that might be useful for this topic, so please give the video a pause and have a look at these. Also, take a note of the gender of the word. So when you're learning words, it's very good to learn the gender too. Don't just learn pauvreté, learn la pauvreté, because you need to know this for agreements and future and other grammar things in French. Here are 10 more words that are linked to the topic of quelles attitudes envers les marginalisés. Give the video a pause and take note of these words. This is just a small list. There are many official words in the textbooks, but this is just an idea of some words that could come up. If we now have a look at the subtopic of qui sont les marginalisés, we can have a look at the definition of marginalisation. So this is the social, economic, or political exclusion of individuals or groups from mainstream society. It leads to limited access to basic rights, resources, and opportunities, such as education, healthcare, and employment. Marginalisation often stems from systemic inequalities, discrimination, or social stigmas. For example, in France, the homeless are marginalised, so around 300,000 people are homeless. This can be caused by unemployment, high rental costs, or family breakdowns. You've also got the long-term unemployed, so people who face difficulty re-entering the job market due to stigma and lack of relevant skills. Immigrants and asylum seekers are often marginalised due to administrative hurdles, language barriers, and xenophobia, so negative attitudes towards foreigners. Ethnic minorities can experience racial discrimination in employment, housing, and law enforcement. The LGBTQ community, despite legal progress such as same-sex marriage in 2013, many still face prejudice and violence. In other Francophone countries, we can have a look at marginalisation, so street children in Francophone Africa. It's common in countries such as Cote d'Ivoire and the Democratic Republic of Congo for there to be children roaming the streets, often without parents. Causes of this can be poverty, family breakdown, and armed conflicts. In French-speaking Canada, so Quebec, Indigenous communities often struggle with lots of aspects of life, including access to education, healthcare, and other opportunities. They also face high rates of unemployment and substance abuse due to historic injustices. In some African countries, women are also marginalised. So, for example, in Chad, over 60% of women are married before the age of 18, which again shows the attitudes towards women and how women are often faced with things are forced upon them with lack of choice. There are also general gender inequalities, particularly in employment and political representation. There are also LGBT people who are marginalised. So, for example, in Senegal, it's illegal to openly serve in the military for LGBT people. Causes of marginalisation, we're going to briefly cover these. So, it could be poverty. In France, around 9 million people live below the poverty line. And poverty exacerbates social exclusion by limiting access to housing, education, and healthcare. Another cause is just pure discrimination. This could be based on race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and many other factors. It prevents equal opportunities in various aspects of life, including employment and education. Unemployment could be a cause. So in France, the unemployment rate is around 7%. So this is people who are looking for a job, basically, and they can't get a job. And these rates are higher in underprivileged areas, which leads to economic instability and further social exclusion. So it's a vicious circle. Political and social conflicts can sometimes cause marginalisation. Refugees fleeing war or authoritarian regimes often face marginalisation in host countries. Finally, there can be some language barriers causing marginalisation. Immigrants in France and other Francophone countries may struggle to integrate due to limited French proficiency. What are the consequences of marginalisation? There are many. We're going to briefly cover some. These are general and are not specific to one country, but you can talk about this in an exam if they ask. So, marginalisation often leads to social isolation. Certain individuals can feel disconnected from their communities, leading to loneliness and alienation, can lead to economic hardship. Many rely on social welfare and live in precarious conditions if they're marginalised, can lead to mental health issues, so higher rates of depression, anxiety, and other disorders. They may experience limited access to services such as healthcare, quality education, stable employment opportunities too. Finally, there could be a generational impact. So marginalization can perpetuate cycles of poverty and exclusion within families, which is clear as if you have marginalized parents, your opportunities in life, um, your start in life will be a lot worse compared to other people. We are now going to cover the topic of Quelle aide pour les marginalisés. So, support for marginalised essentially covers efforts made by governments, organisations, and individuals to help those excluded from society to regain access to basic rights, services, and opportunities. This is very important because reducing inequality, promoting social cohesion, can improve the quality of life for vulnerable populations. In France, there's government assistance, so monthly financial aid for low income individuals and families is sometimes offered, and there are also unemployment benefits for those seeking work under certain conditions too. In terms of the roles of associations, we've covered this in previous videos, but an example would be Les Restos du Cœur, an organisation that offers food distribution, hot meals, and social support for those in need. Finally, some challenges to providing support include insufficient funding. Sometimes there are bureaucratic hurdles that delay access to assistance, stigma and discrimination that come from helping individuals. And finally, there can be an over reliance on NGOs, and sometimes limited governmental action can reduce the aid given to the marginalised. Moving on to the final subtopic this is Quelle's attitude envers les marginalisés. So, what attitudes are there towards towards marginalised people? So, these attitudes refer to the perceptions, behaviours, and opinions of individuals and institutions towards those who are vulnerable or excluded. The importance of this topic, so essentially, these attitudes will shape social inclusion, influence public policy, and impact the daily lives of these groups. We can see that there are positive attitudes towards marginalised groups through solidarity and kindness. There are supports for organisations like Les Restos du Cœur, which we mentioned in a previous video, and also the fact that these organisations exist shows that there's support for marginalised people, and people do participate and volunteer with these groups. There are many efforts to fight discrimination too. So there are initiatives such as SOS Racisme, which aims to combat racism, and promote equality. We have raising awareness in education. So generally, educational programs in schools and sometimes workplaces can promote diversity and inclusion. Finally, there's political support. This is in some cases, the approval of social policies to reduce inequalities, especially on the left, such as income support or social housing. There can be, however, some negative attitudes towards marginalised groups, starting with prejudices and stereotypes. There can be racism towards ethnic minorities. In France, this can be especially people from North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, however, not limited to those. Stereotypes about the homeless too. They're often seen as lazy or responsible for their situation. There can sometimes be institutional discrimination. So you could argue it could be difficult for disabled people to access certain public transport or buildings, and inequalities in employment access for refugees and immigrants. Furthermore, there can be rejection and distrust, so Islamophobia, which can be exacerbated by terrorist attacks, and also mistrust towards asylum seekers, who can be seen as economic burdens by some people. Finally, negative attitudes could just be indifference. So people may have a lack of interest in social issues affecting marginalised people, and there may be low participation in local initiatives for mutual aid. The media, now moving on to the role of the media can have an important role on shaping attitudes. So in a positive way, There can be documentaries and reports can raise public awareness of the realities of marginalized groups, and social media campaigns can denounce discrimination and promote inclusion. However, the media can stigmatize or oversimplify certain issues or groups in films and shows, and sensationalist media coverage associating certain groups, um, such as immigrants, with crime. This can exacerbate negative stereotypes. Now, looking at the initiatives to change attitudes, education and awareness. Sometimes schools can have workshops on tolerance and inclusion, and workplaces can have anti-discrimination training courses. Community engagement, political actions such as strengthening anti-discrimination laws and creating housing and employment programs to facilitate integration into the society. Finally, we're going to cover briefly some challenges to changing attitudes. So there can sometimes be resistance to change in certain communities due to deeply rooted stereotypes in culture and institutions. And economic crises can increase xenophobia and the rejection of marginalized groups. So this is when people in general will be struggling. These sentiments, these negative feelings may increase in France. So we're going to have a look now at some corrections, and on the screen I have a pointer just to help my explanations. This is a good exercise because sometimes in an exam you can write a sentence down, it can be incorrect and you don't realize, so you need to just practice going over incorrect sentences. Some of these are easier than others, and there is also the chance that there's more than one error per sentence. So first sentence, les marginalisés sont des personnes qui vivent dans la rue et qui sont rejetées par la société. Give the video a pause and try and find the error here. So we can see, we're looking at the corrected version, the first error would be with the verb to live here. So it should be conjugated as vivre, as we're talking about third person plural. And the next error is the agreement with rejeter. So it needs to agree with personne in this case. So there's an E because personne is female, and an S because it's plural. The next sentence we have here, beaucoup de marginalisés n'ont pas accès à des soins médicaux appropriés. Give the video a pause and try and work out what the errors are. So again, we can see here, the first error would be with beaucoup de. You always need to say beaucoup de. It's never beaucoup de. Then moving on, ne, you can't have ne en, as there are two vowels here. You just need to put them together and it becomes non. And having a look at the rest, that's fine. So moving on to the last sentence on the slide. Les immigrés sont souvent marginalisés parce que de leur origine ethnique. What's the error here? So looking at the corrected version, we can see the agreement's fine, but the error here is using parce que. So we learned that parce que means because, but when we want to say because of something, we use à cause de. We don't use parce que, we use à cause de. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the next two sentences. These are the last two. Give the video a pause and try and find the errors in both, and we'll go over them. So in the first sentence, there are a few errors. We have the conjugation of the verb aider. It needs to be conjugated as aid. Then moving on, we can see it says here, on donner des aides. So the sentence should ideally be translated as, if we translate the green sentence, the government helps the marginalized people by giving them financial help, but they don't receive enough. So when we say by giving, we say en donnant. We don't say en donner, we say en donnant. This is also known as the present participle. We say en donnant des aides. And then we also add in en leur donnant des aides because you're talking about giving aid to them. So you can't just say en donnant des aides, that doesn't make sense. You need to say donnant des aides. And then the last error would be with the conjugation of the verb recevoir, which is to receive. In the third person plural, it's reçoivent, not receive. So those are the errors there. And finally, the last sentence. Des organisations caritatives offrent des logements pour les personnes sans abri, mais il n'y a pas assez. Let's have a look at what we've got here. Okay, so we've got the error being here. So when you're talking about something, so in this case we're talking about les logements, des logements, for homeless people. But when we're saying that there are not enough, we want to say there are not enough of them. So we need to add an on, mais il n'y en a pas assez. That makes sense because in the previous sentence we've just said they offer accommodation for homeless people, but there isn't enough. But we need to be more specific in French. So we need to say there isn't enough of it, or there aren't enough of them. So that's what the on means in this case, of it, of them, depending on what your translation of the word is. But we say il n'y en a pas assez. That is the use of the word en. If you're not familiar with this word en, just go over it. Plenty of videos explaining it on YouTube. Thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. I'm also going to be making some videos in the future, not only on the topics, but also on things such as exam technique and also the research project and a lot more. So please do stick around for those videos. But for now, we'll see you in a future video. À bientôt.